What did you think of the pardon?
I thought it was an injustice. I thought it was wrong. To this day, it's one of those hot buttons. I didn't think we let the process carry itself out. And I just thought it was wrong.
Did you ever have a conversation with Congressman Rodino about the pardon?
Mm-hmm. He understood it, but he didn't think it was right. But he understood it. He understood President Ford's motivation was to let's get the country healed. But again, I go back to what I've said often in this conversation. He was very much a process person. He thought you let the system carry forward, and but he wasn't strong. He didn't have in other words, I had a much more visceral reaction than he did. I remember this conversation we had. He just said, "I understand." Who he knew very well and had a good relationship with President Ford. He said, I understand how we have to move on. But he, being institutionalist and a process person, he thought that was not the right decision.
By the way, since we're talking about Vice President Ford, later President, before that Congressman Ford, do you remember the politicking around the selection of a vice president by President Nixon, and the fact that John Connally was his first choice?
Mm-hmm.
What do you?
I just remember it was all in the air, and then, a lot of the conversation was, which we had to sort of filter out. A lot of the conversation we picked President Ford because who'd want him as president? That was a very common sort of thought at the time. It was irrelevant to us, but I remember Rodino. He liked Gerald Ford. He thought he was a fine, decent man. He knew him, for years. But that was sort of the common wisdom of the time, that it was a political move on the part, and that would prevent our process from moving forward, because we'd never move forward with the idea that Gerald Ford could be president. Sort of didn't affect the chairman at all.
Did the chairman like the final report of his committee on the impeachment committee?
Mm-hmm. He thought it was. I think he was greatly relieved that this was over, but he fulfilled his obligation. I think he felt that, and I think he felt honored by the whole process, and I think that he was honored to do it, but he thought he did. He thought he gave his best.
Do you think that his relationship with Tip O'Neill and Speaker of the House, Carl Albert, and others, did it change as a result of this process? Did they have more respect for him afterwards?
Oh yeah, he had a very wonderful rest of his career. He was honored. He loved it. He loved, as a congressman from New Jersey, he loved the attention. He'd go to speaking, and yeah, he was deeply, there was an aura about him, that he carried for the rest of his career. And again, retrospectively, all the members then honored him. I remember I went to his funeral, and there was Paul Sarbanes and Charlie Rangel, people who had long gone, had all their own distinguished careers, et cetera, and came back to pay him honor. So, yeah, he liked that.
Can you give us a word picture? Because, of course, she died young, relatively young. What was Barbara Jordan like?
I have no more to add, but she was just like wonderful. You like to be with her. In other words, she'd come in a room, she filled a room. You think, wow, there's some people who she just filled a room. She had, because the voice and all of that was wonderful, but she had a lot of energy. She was big, and so you liked to be with her because she was funny. And, she was just a freshman, so she was that sort of distance. But again, the chairman who wouldn't like to be around Barbara Jordan? She was just fun, and she was smart. And he thought, he thought, wow, what a wonderful career she had ahead of her. He always said that. He said, my goodness. He said, this member's going to go far.
Did the chairman do anything at the end of the process special, or to thank the staff?
Yeah, he thanked the staff. I don't remember. He thanked. I think he went down, because remember, it sort of all went back to normal in the sense that all of a sudden 125 people went away, or whatever that number was, and there it was.
Did he go to the Congressional Hotel to see them, to see their offices?
Yeah,
sometime?
he went over. He went over a number of times. We went over, often, but during the process. But again, there was a lot of bitterness. You've read the books and the stories of people who were very unhappy on the left with the process. Jack Brooks and others were still, Jerry Ziefman, others were, I guess, for years carried on that they were very unhappy with the way this was conducted.
But they wanted 5 articles?
I don't know. You'd have to go back, and they were unhappy. They just didn't feel he, John Doerr, were their choices, and they didn't carry the process as they would have. And I don't know what that means. In other words, we go back and look at historically, I'm thinking, what other momentous event in our history has been sort of accepted by the American public? I mean, that's how the process is supposed to work. But listen, it was a very traumatic undertaking. So you're not going to get unanimous opinion on this. But
do you think the process worked?
I think the process worked brilliantly.
You leave government, and you go into the movie business.
Mm-hmm.
You had something to do with Gallipoli?
Yes, I produced Gallipoli. I wanted to leave. It doesn't matter what I did. I remember what I love when you're young, you have wonderful mentors. I had Peter Rodino. I had another wonderful mentor named John Gardner, who was the founder of Common Cause. And I met him through this process, and he was just a wise human being. And when this process ended, I said, what do I do with my life? I said, do I stay? And he's the one that says, go reinvent yourself. He's constantly reinvent yourself. He's just this wonderful man. And I decided I wanted to do something that was completely not, this was it. I said, I loved, a great respect for government, great respect. I just don't want to do it again. I think it was such a traumatic undertaking. And I said, so I spent a year. John Gardner was very wise, and he guided me through this year, and I talked to all kinds of people. I went to IBM up in New York, where they all wore black and shoes, and all. I'd fit in today, actually. But and it's interesting. So I'd interview with people, and they'd say, "Well, what have you done?" I go to a business. What have you done? I'm thinking, wow, I just did something, but it didn't count. I didn't have an accounting degree or a law degree or something. But then I got attracted to the movie business. Barry Diller was recruited me, because they don't care who you were. It's sort of, they didn't care where you came from. That's what I loved about the business. It's just it's true. You could work in the mailroom one year and be the president of the company. And I just love the idea there were no rules in the movie business. And so I thought, what a wonderful way to sort of drain myself of this world, take a challenge I know nothing about, and go out. And I spent a number of wonderful years with, it was Barry Diller, Michael Eisner, Jeffrey Katzenberg. It was all a bunch of great people at the time at Paramount. And we had a great time. Charlie Bluthorn owned it. He was wonderful to deal with. And then I went on. I left there, and I said, it's enough of that. Louis Malle was became a great friend. Louis Malle. I remember I was editing one of his scripts once, and again, it's like being in impeachment. I don't know nothing. So I'm editing one. So he looks up at me and goes, "Francis, you don't know shit," he says. And we became great friends, he said, because I had no idea what I was doing. I was sitting here editing Louis Malle's script. But anyway, I loved it. And then I left. I said, this is wonderful. And headed out to Australia, because there was a lot of young, interesting, dynamic filmmakers coming out of Australia, and I thought it would be fun. And then we came across a story that eventually became Gallipoli, and I had to go get money, I had to get financing, and I got money from was still alive, a guy named Bob Stigwood, who was manager of the Bee Gees and others. He produced Saturday Night Fever, Grease, and all that. And then the other half, he told me to now go find the rest of the money. I went back out to Australia, and I met this little newspaper man who owned a bunch of newspapers. And he thought movies were frivolous and television frivolous because he was a newspaper man. But I knew something that he knew, but we never talked about it, but he came with half the money because his father was the most instrumental person on telling the world about this tragedy of Gallipoli. And of course, it was Rupert Murdoch. So that was an extraordinary experience. Then I went on to do other things.
You knew that about Rupert Murdoch's father before you met Rupert Murdoch?
And then we never talked about it. But when we said go find money, because doing our research, Peter and I were doing the research, we said, this is how the stories got told, because Rupert Murdoch was a reporter, and he snuck out with all the dispatches to London, and Times of London would be, you know. So we knew that. So when I went to pitch the story, told him about Gallipoli, he never said a word, and I never said a word. And because why would he? I mean, he had such a big empire. Why would he waste his time on just a little film that was, you know, just peanuts to him? But of course, what it was, you know, I tapped into an honor thing with him.
Peter Weir was the one who brought Mel Gibson.
Yes, he found Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson had an interesting career. he's an American, born upstate New York. Went to Australia when he was 10, and had been in a few minor films, and we saw him on stage. Actually, he was in a play, and you actually could not understand. His Australian accent was so thick that we sort of had to give him American lessons when we did the film. But you could tell then, extraordinary potential. But Peter was also an extraordinary director, and just a wonderful person to deal with. So that was another sort of one-off experience. That was a fabulous experience.
Did you do Breaker Morant?
No, that was done. Bruce Beresford directed that, and that was done almost at the same time. It was done before Gallipoli, actually, by a director called Bruce Beresford.
Do you want to mention another film you did?
No, that's it.
This has been wonderful.